Okay, hi everyone. My name is Paul McGartle. I work in Dublin for the National Transport Authority. I work in the active travel investment team, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with what this place used to be like back when I was in college, but it was essentially an old mental asylum. So it was definitely less walkable than it is now. So it's great to walk through the campus and see so many people using their feet to get around. Actually, outside at Broadstone Plaza, just where the Lewis line comes into Grange Gorman, that is one of the projects that my team in the FAA funded and delivered in conjunction with the City Council. So it's also great to walk through that scheme to get here. So I just want to introduce this. Firstly, all of the speakers who are going to be joining us today. So firstly, it's Sarah O'Donnell from Walk21 International Ireland. Next, joining us virtually will be Emily Rue from the Association of Transport and Environment in Switzerland. Then it'll be Eric Van Hal and Mark Burlett from the City of Eindhoven. Then Maya Caroline Rinning, is that right? Yeah. From the Institute of Transport Economics at Oslo, Norway. And then finally joining us virtually will be Paolo Cambra from the University of Lisbon. So, just to introduce Sarah first. So Sarah's Assistant Chief Architect with PII, as I said, and has over 20 years experience in the design and delivery of light rail and public transport. She recently completed a Master's in Sustainable Development here to TU Dublin. And her dissertation explored the potential for green infrastructure to be applied as an organising concept and framework to urban spatial planning, and what are typically grey infrastructure projects. So looking forward to hearing about that and what you're doing with TIA. So take it away.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here in such esteemed company to talk through some of the projects that my colleagues and I have worked on over the years, trying to link cyclists, walkers, and communities to this network. So I'll talk at a very high level about some of the accessibility projects that we carried out, and some of the background to that. I'll go through some of the projects that we built, some of the ones that we didn't, and then I'd like to talk very briefly at the end on some of the lessons learned and how we're applying those to current projects such as Lewis Davis. So just for anybody who's not familiar with the Lewis Light Rail Network, it basically comprises of two main lines. So Tala and Sauget are to the west of the city, and they connect to Dublin Port, basically, at the point. And Brydeslen at the bottom of the Green Line connects up to Bridge in the north. So this is an image of the original Green Line, which opened in June 2004. There was some discussion about having a parallel joined cycle and walking route at the time. Ultimately, the decision was made that we needed to allow for an upgrade to future higher capacity network such as Metrolink. So just as I go through some of these projects, I suppose it's reasonable to wonder why some of these active travel projects, such as walking and cycling lanes, aren't built from day one. And there are several reasons for that, I suppose. Back at the time of the original red and green line designs, it would have been much more difficult to have included so-called extraneous functions into the scope. And the planning parameters around the light rail order process is quite limited. And also it's fair to say that, traditionally, there would have been a quite conventional transport engineering approach to design in a somewhat siloed infrastructure delivery structure. So in other words, different delivery agencies having their own unique singular function. And that has improved a great deal in recent years, in my view. There would also have been, in the early stages of the line, resistance from locals and concerns regarding impact on their communities, and sometimes when the lines open, that those concerns can wane. And of course, it's fair to say that sometimes knowledge and travel patterns can emerge once the system is open, and that it's always worth revisiting and looking for opportunities. But nevertheless, even at the earliest stages of the opening of the red and green lines, there was an understanding that we needed to take a high level, a big picture approach to sustainable transport. And so we worked with the Dublin Transportation Office at the time, Dublin Bus, local parties and other stakeholders. And this is just a little project that we did around Sandiford on the Green Line, where we looked for walking links opportunities, and we literally just walked every housing estate, every park, and identified a whole series of links, some of which were ultimately delivered. And we also looked at improved bus interchange and cycle infrastructure, etc. In 2011, we carried out a really comprehensive system-wide accessibility review. So that that was a multidisciplinary approach where we walked the entire network from stop to stop, and we looked at existing conditions on the ground and observed behaviours such as where are people parking their bikes, are they on railings, etc., where are the desire lines. And out of that, we developed a whole series of scope of works, and these were accompanied by construction feasibility reports, environmental appraisals, and costings. And the projects ranged in scale from very simple pedestrian crossings, improved bike parking, to more comprehensive walking and cycling routes. So you can see there, this is just kind of an example of some of, the whole series of minor works that came out of that accessibility review. And you can see the list of stops there, and they were funded by the NTA Sustainable Transport Measures Grant. So I'll just talk through some of them. This is just an example of one at Cookstown. So you can see, Cookstown stop is there, and these are the residential areas of Belgar Green, Cairnwood, and Amberley, and it's very clear that for those residents trying to access the stop where there was a continuous boundary along Cookstown Road, it's very difficult and circuitous. So a simple intervention, was identified, and there were concerns from local residents initially, but that was an example of where once the red line was opened, gradually, went back a couple of times, and gradually people kind of came around to the idea, and the benefits are kind of here now. So the transport policy context at the time was that accessibility review comprised of smarter travel, the 2020 vision sustainable travel and transport, the national cycle policy framework, and the really excellent NTA for mobility best practice guideline. And so just some of the projects that came out of that, we developed a high quality cycling ride infrastructure at Dundrum, Houston, Spencer Dock, and Windy Arbor. With the local authorities, we developed walking lanes, Sandyford, Cookstown, Cala Hospital, Kingswood, Cowper, and other places. And then, as I say, there were multiple smaller interventions, such as improved crossings, increased cycle parking, directional signage, and we developed bespoke stop identifiers to show where some of the, to indicate where some of the offline use stops were, etc. So this is really, I'll just go through the cycling ride scheme that we did. We wanted to develop an identifiable suite of measures located adjacent to the Lewis stop. So we developed a bespoke bicycle shelter. We focused on very high quality external works. You've got yourself finding gravel, your good quality paving. We had good lighting, CCTV, and there was an emphasis then on a signage. We developed bespoke signage and mapping, etc. And there was an emphasis on landscape as well to make it as attractive as possible. So the image on the top left is at Spencer Dock. The one in the middle is at Houston, and that's a very well used facility. We also provide in some locations longer term bike cabinets. And then the lower right hand one is a project that we designed with a point. It hasn't been built yet, but maybe someday it will. It was again a very nice project of planting and the whole suite of measures that were part of the cycling ride scheme. So really, this is at Dundrum. And really, the emphasis on high quality was just on the basis that we wanted to convey a sense of respect for walkers, cyclists, and users of public transport. And this is a scheme that we did at Windy Arbor as part of the cycling ride. On the left, you can see the site before we had the intervention. We're revisiting that now based on some feedback from the local residents that were concerns about noise and antisocial behaviour, etc. And there are also some kind of lingering issues to do with kind of interaction between bikes and walkers, school kids, etc. So this is just a kind of a modification of the original scheme where we're replacing the shelter with tree planting. We've got a kind of a benign separation between walkers and cyclists, rather than heavy duty engineering interventions. We're hoping that we can just kind of an intuitive path through the site. We also, with the local authorities, developed a whole series of walking links. So the top left is at Bury Road, the Shepherdstown Road to Sandyford. The top right is at Cowper. The lower left links Milltown, Lewis stops at Mount St. Anne's, and the one on the right is at Kingswood. And again, landscape played a really important part on the basis that these routes are attractive, they'd be used, and therefore they'd be safe. So this is just a little study of Kingswood Heights. We kind of learned as we were doing these projects that just busting a hole through a wall and exposing estates to a busy road, wasn't going to be acceptable, and particularly for the people who live closest to that opening. So, try to kind of take the approach that you'd use more oblique circuitous and landscaped routes, and that you maintain a sense of enclosure and privacy within the estate. So this is a really good route that connects hundreds of school kids every day to the Kingswood stop. This is one in Tala that we did. You can see from the ortho so the stop is there, and there's a circuitous route right around. It was previously around a rather hostile road network, so we just did a direct ramp and stairs down to the hospital and worked with them to create a new public access at the back. Now, that hasn't been without problems. There was a lot of back and forth and concern with the hospital administration. Sometimes it's closed off and sometimes it's open, and we're hoping that ultimately it will be really well used. So this is a project that hasn't been built, but we worked on it with the local area right down and the UNTA, and it's a beautiful project out in Bridesglen, and it will connect Bridesglen Lewis stop, which is here, right through to Loughlinstown roundabout, and then it will connect with the on-road infrastructure that the local authority will provide, and it covers, crosses the beautiful Cherrywood Viaduct, it goes to the back of the hospital with this beautiful plain pitches and an old family graveyard and everything. So initially the hospital were very supportive, and then they kind of had concerns about going through their land, so they took a slightly more conservative approach. So it was put on hold, but hopefully to be, developed further, and it would be an amazing route. It would mean that cyclists and walkers could avoid the busy Whitefoot Junction and a whole network of hostile roads, and it would also create a beautiful kind of leisure and walking community as well as a commuter route. We also developed a whole series of sister links to go with that, so hopefully that will be good soon. And these are just small interventions out by City West, where again you can see the, on City West, which is there for people living here that walk all the way around to get to the stop. So just small interventions, but really yield great benefit. It's the one on the left then, it's a little route that connects residents in Brookview to Cheeverstown stop. So that really, the kind of lessons that we learned from that, all of those was, understand the context, understand the need and the user, communicate with stakeholders, allow time. Sometimes people are very resistant to these projects, but once the light rail and the stops are in focus, they realise, actually, I do want to get to it quicker, I don't want to have to walk miles around, and people can see the benefits. So it might take a few goes, but hopefully, people come around to the idea. But it's important, as I said, to use landscape solutions to bring multiple benefits and to, again, creative solutions to concerns that people might have. And then again, use long-term value, add the best quality urban health that you can deliver because it's there for the long term. And finally, collect data and measure before and after conditions. We wouldn't be that great on that previously, but that is improving very much in recent times. The policy context now is another thing that has improved no end. In other words, it's much more supportive. So, you can see that there's a lot more support out there for that kind of integrated approach. So that brings me on to Lewis Finglas, which is, we hope a really fantastic project. We're hoping to go to railway order next year. It's a 4-kilometre route extending from Groombridge on the Green Line up to Charlestown in North Dublin. It's the first project that I've worked on where there's really good integration between all of the disciplines. In other words, your engineering concerns are, interlaced with placemaking, with landscape, with environment, with circular economy, and with other social issues. And there's a huge emphasis on walking. So, improved footpaths, links, resting places, seating, viewing points, filter permeability, etc. So it's green track most of the way. You can see the sketch on the right is an image of the route going through St. Helene's Park, and it could be a green track running up with meandering cycle paths, and then a segregated meandering walking paths following the topography. And again, so the residents on these, side aren't that keen on opening up their boundary, but what we're doing is just trying to make sure that there are positive uses for that space ultimately, that you have these kind of intermediary spaces that allow people to, get used to it and ultimately see the benefit. A very important aspect of this project is the analysis that's done a lot in travelling in women's shoes, which is a TII document, and the TII gender lens, and that led then to the application of Jan Miguel's public life survey, which is basically an analysis of how the spaces are currently used, men, women, cyclists, walkers, dog walkers, etc., and that fed back into the design. So this is just some of the stuff that we're working on in practice. This is the Mull Road currently. There's footbridge that you have to cross over, and the road really divides communities. So we're changing the roundabout to a much more compact junction, reclaiming carriageway space for suds, for walkers, for cycling, and at-grade crossings for pedestrians. Similarly, at Charlestown, much more compact junction for currently from slip roads and multiple lanes, etc. And this will be a hub and connection people can hopefully, be more of a place. And this just gives a demonstration of the area as it is now, and this is with the road overlaid, and this shows the allocation of space in the existing and future layout. So yeah, like I say, we're all feeling hugely positive about the Lewis project. It's a fantastic team. Huge credit must go to the team, including the engineering design consultants, Barry Aegis, and a special mention to Emer Fox, TI's landscape architect, who has done a huge amount of landscape analysis and whose beautiful sketches have been so persuasive in making the case for this kind of really, top quality integrated planning. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. I had a couple of questions on that, but we can keep them to the end. So I think I should have said at the start, it's around 12 minutes for each presenter, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. That should give us around 20 minutes at the end. Emily, next, I think, Emily, if you're there.
Yes.
I will just give you a quick introduction to the room. So, Emily Rue is a from Switzerland. She has been working in the ATI Swiss Association. I think that stands for the Association of Transport and Environment. She is in charge of the Reduce Parking Habitat platform to promote forms of housing that reduce the place of the car and encourage active mobility. She also works on the promotion of sustainable travel for children. So welcome, Emily, and take it away, please.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to share my screen.
Yeah,
it's okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So hello, everyone. So as Paul said, my name is Emily Roux. I'm a geographer and a project manager, and I work in Geneva, Switzerland, for this platform. So I'm gonna present you the platform and why we created it. So we really wanted with this platform to collect great examples, first in Switzerland and then in Europe. To promote this type of housing, and it's housing without parking places or with less parking places. So it's not just removing the cars from our views. It's also to reduce the number of cars in all the neighborhoods, so people walk more, use more bikes. And so it was really important for us to promote this kind of housing and put humans before cars. And what are the factors that led to the creation of such neighborhoods? It's interesting to see that in Switzerland there are some interesting trends, and more and more people live without a car, a private car, and in the big cities, more than 50% of people live without a car. So we don't have to build so much parking places in the new housing. It's really in Bern, 56%. So we have a lot of people without a car. And also in Switzerland, the level of public transport service is mostly great. You can see on this map, most of the city are very good public transport service, so you don't have to use a car. And that's why this kind of housing is really, really interesting. What are the conditions? That's what we created also with the platform, is to help people build with less car, with mobility concept. So how many parking spaces are needed? how will demand be assessed, what are the legal requirements, because in Switzerland we don't have the same legal requirements by cantons, so it's sometimes difficult. Can we make savings by building this kind of housing? What are the alternatives to the private care that we have and we can integrate? So many questions to build this, but we saw with the platform that it's really possible to do this. And I want to show you some great example in Switzerland. So here you have the map of the housing we collected, in green existing project, and in, I don't know where color you see, but in orange you have the project that are going build. So it's not all this, in all the content of Switzerland, but we are more and more great examples. One thing, one solution we see a lot is car sharing, private car sharing. So the people who live in the building work together to build car sharing. So in one neighborhoods, it's the future inhabitants who sold the car to the building owner to create a private car sharing. And some really simple solution can be implemented, such as keys sharing. And car sharing is also using to improve and encourage active mobility, because you don't have a car every day, so you cannot use it every day. And some other interesting solutions are a good exchange system. So on the left picture, you have a system in Zurich, so you can just exchange fondue set or stuff like that. So you don't have to go by car to buy stuff. Letter boxes with different size can be a solution for when you have delivery of bulky parcels. And a lot of neighborhood do local farming, so you can shop in your neighborhood your own goods. So everything is done to have proximity and convenience in the neighborhood, so you don't have to use a car and you can go by foot or by bike to build stuff. And the result we can observe from now, it's there are still too many places that are built in Switzerland due to legal requirements. But we can see that everywhere where we reduce the parking space, the use of private vehicle decrease, and also people use more bike or go by foot to their activity. There is also more space to design quality public space, and savings are made during the construction, and really simple and innovative solution can be implemented. I just put, for example, the picture on the left was interesting because it was a neighborhood where too many parking spaces were built, and they have to use the parking space with a brewery because no cars will use it. So we can see that it's really important to think how many parking spaces are needed and why we build it. So as I said, it's really important to think about the mobility when we build new neighborhoods, to involve local peoples, to show them that it's possible to do stuff without a car, to buy food, to buy bike. There are simple solutions like the car sharing with just sharing the keys I show you. It's definitely easier to build with fewer cars in cities, in big cities, but this model is also applicable to the countryside. We have some example in Switzerland where the level of public transportation is really low, but we can do it. And it's also possible with existing neighborhoods. We have also some projects where we remove cars from existing neighborhoods, and it's also really interesting. So All these great examples are on our platform. So example from Europe or Switzerland, you can check, and maybe it's for you some solution you can have for your own projects. And for that, the platform also organize twice a year seminars in French or in German. And we had in 2020 a webinar was in English with great example from Sweden, Germany, some of Switzerland. And you have the replay and the report of this webinar on our platform. So I normally have put it here. So you have all the informations. I don't know if you see my mouse, but you have the information and the webinar for those who don't speak French or German. You have all the informations. And we also are looking for new examples from around Europe, around the world. So if some of you here who are listening to me who have nice examples, please send it to me, because we always want to have new examples to share to the Swiss people. So this is it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily, and I hope you can stay around for the Q&A a little bit later. So we're going to move to Holland now, city of Eindhoven, and Eric Van Hal and Mark Burlett are going to tell us about the future of downtown Brainport as a place for people. I don't have an introduction for Mark, so Mark can introduce himself when he comes on. Eric is an urban mobility planner at the Urban Planning Department of the city of Eindhoven. And its main areas of focus are urban densification and sustainable mobility, pedestrians, public transport, and redefining and redesigning public space. So welcome, guys.
Thank you very much. Now, because of the short time, only 12 minutes, my introduction will be short. I'm a colleague of Eric, a mobility traffic planner. I've only worked here for the city of Eindhoven, but working within the city center to look if we can make the mobility more active. But we want to take you along our presentation within the development of a central station area called Knoop XL. Knoop XL will transform from a car-oriented to a much more walkable neighborhood. But before we zoom in on the project, we want to give you a short introduction about our city. Our city is a relatively new city. It only exists 100 years, since 1920. The city planning was based on the Garden City principles and was mainly focused on car traffic. Our DNA can be summarized as radial, modern, and green. Since the founding of the Philips company, Eindhoven has become one of the main 3 economic regions in the Netherlands. Eindhoven is known for its knowledge industries, so the region is called Brainport. Brainport has approximately 500,000 inhabitants and accommodates 300,000 jobs. The region is a global operating high-tech campus with world-leading companies such as Philips and ASML. In 2013, our mobility master plan, Eindhoven on the Road, was adopted by the city council. We still use it in our daily work. There are 2 main key principles shown on the right side of this sheet. First one is actually less car traffic, so give pedestrians and cyclists, the slow motions, priority where possible. And the second one is placemaking, redesign public spaces in favor of active modes of transport. Our guiding principles of this policy are shown in this matrix structure. Yeah, it's quite huge, but we have horizontal all the different areas in our city, and vertical all modes of transport in the city. And it's nice to mention that pedestrians were an integral part of this mobility policy, and it was actually the first one in the Netherlands. For example, we can look to the left of guiding principle. That's for the city center, and then for pedestrians, it says we want to find the main network of streets and pavements combined with variously arranged squares. To visualize the effects of the pedestrians in our city, a GPS tracking project took place in 2017. The result of this GPS tracking project is this heat map, which shows the density of pedestrian movements in and around the city. It's clearly visible that the pedestrian movements are the most densest in and around the city center, and Eindhoven's only large train station with black circle. The matrix structure I showed just before, they are developed into mobility maps. This is a specific mobility map for our city center. And that includes the projects Erin is going to talk about, Eindhoven North XL. We want to extend the city center following 4 guiding principles. The first is a denser network for pedestrians and cyclists. Second one is separate lanes for bus and rapid transit. Third one is less continuous routes and lanes for car traffic. And 4 is redesigning the public spaces with uniform street profiles. The challenge for the next decade is to build 30,000 extra dwellings and 30,000 extra jobs within the boundaries of the existing city center. To create the required space and also the quality of living, the mobility transition to more active modes of transport is needed. Our biggest project within the city center is Knoop XL, in which an extra 8,500 dwellings will be built. And now I will give the floor to Eric for further explanation of this very interesting project.
Thank you, Mark. So this is the master plan of Knoop XL, the central station area. And as you can see on the yellow part, that's really the fine grained network and the squares, which is defined in that matrix policy, which we are going to try to realize here. Not trying, we are going to realize it. And actually, this is a view of the area as it is nowadays. It is full of infrastructure that's leading. We have on the main boulevard is an urban profile between 70 and 100 meters. There are 30,000 cars running, about 3,000 buses. We have a bus station with about 55,000 passengers a day, and a train station with 70,000. We have at least 20,000 cyclists going along there. In tunnels, even as the pedestrians, they are below the surface to cross there. Only 2,000 people are living here nowadays, so it's actually not a living area, and there are office buildings. And to transform this whole area, we have 5 leading principles, which are here in the images, and I'll go into them all 5 briefly. So it will be an urban district for everyone, and multifunctional area for all ages and all types of households. A functional mix of living, work, leisure, culture, education, and expo. And it will have an active ground level, so the ground floor will be active functions, public spaces and places to walk and places to go to, and to move from place to place actually as a basic for an enjoyable city life. There's been an urban densification strategy put up, and this will be implemented to have a good urban quality, and which has rules for ground floors, for block sizes, accessibility, even for a second ground level, which can be introduced and also ensure an active, attractive walking environment. We will maximize green for climate resilience and for livability. And for every extra house, 8 square meters of extra green will be implemented in the area. That's our standard. That can be on ground level, it can be on the roofs, and it can be on the facades. So that's a design challenge. Softening the surface also with at least 10%. And at the middle size, you see the river valley of the Dublin. We will be widening that and integrate that as a park environment into the area, and we'll bring in the Brabant landscape. Brabant is the province which we live in, so the flora of the Brabant will be implemented in this area as park elements. Then for the mobility, the city boulevard concept is very important. We're making it a street for people, and I've heard yesterday the streets should be a destination and not a street to pull traffic through. So that's the principle we are going for over here. We will be narrowing this street profile to a maximum of 40 meters. So creating addresses on street level, we will take out all through motor traffic. That's about 80% of the total amount of 30,000. We'll be downsizing it, less asphalt, 30 kilometers. Circulation measures will be taken, and there will be fastening alternative routes like our city ring road. So that needs a city level master plan on cars. So maybe a good pedestrian plan is a car plan as a basic to be able to pedestrianize our areas. We will go from up. Not to forget parking, there will only be 0.3 parking place per extra house. So that's quite low. And we will introduce a mobility shop. We have area hubs at 3 places in the area, at the border of the place, and every building cluster has a mobility hub which facilitates shared mobility office. Connected city. We go from barriers to connections for the fine-grained network as defined in our policy matrix. We will extend the city center walking network into this area, and we'll make new railway crossings all over it and improve old crossings in railway barriers. And we'll reference to the historic street map which was destroyed in World War II. We will lower the bus station, which is now on the surface, below ground level, also the in and outgoing bus routes. And this bus station will be integrated with the train station to be able to make an attractive station square, and we will create about 10,000 parking places for bicycles on the north and south side. And the center will be a central hub for the area also. So if there's not enough shared mobility available at the cluster hub, one can take use at the central area. So this will turn into things like this. These are images which are now made up. So this is the city boulevard, of which the profile is narrowed but still spacious, with attracting walking and cycling space and attractive ground level. This is an image of the Dublin waterfront as a new park element within the area, with walking and cycling possibilities and places for recreation and maximizing the green in the area. We'll introduce a second ground floor along the railway corridor for buildings as an extra possibility for walking and for recreation. The underground bus station, this is in study also now, is lowered. You see the entrances to the bus platform below, so we'll be able to make a walkable station square, which is now not the case. This is an aerial view of the whole situation. Well, never mind the architecture, that will be all done again in competitions, of course. This is the redesigned station square in the south side with water elements in it. And here you'll see which we call a diagonal route with an iconic building at the south side of it, which is in the mental map of a lot of people. We respect that, of course. This will be the main walking route at the south side, where the River Gander will be reintroduced to the surface, which is now in the sewage system. And well, it's not a trick we're doing for the first time. This is our central ring road, which was a project we've done a few years ago. which has been redesigned into a route with less asphalt, a lot of space for cyclists for walking, and we put in a lot of greenery and reduced the car intensity with more than 50%. The last image is of a junction. So here we introduced a reverse design order. So we first draw the network for walking and cycling, and spaces which is left over is for cars. So what you see here is that cars have to cross cycling and walking infrastructure and not the other way around as has been for decades. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, guys. So next up we have Maya Caroline Rennie from Oslo, and she's going to be talking to us about promoting walking through central urban regeneration. So Maya is a senior researcher at the Institute of Transport Economics in Oslo, and her research focuses on exploring how to plan for walking infrastructure and how the use of knowledge, power relations, and the different actors involved in such processes influences the outcome. She's currently leading a large research project on how to make people walk more in small Norwegian cities through urban planning and development. I think that's what we're talking about now.
Well, not actually, because that's coming up later. So
Okay.
this is from a different project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
And I felt kind of by starting to say, I feel like there's so much, not like people who are engineers and come to apologize. I am an engineer. I'm not a transport engineer, but I am an engineer. But I'm also an architect. And then I stumbled into urban design and my heart was lost. So this is part of a larger project that was called ADAPT, and we had one more package with my colleague, Others, who was at the panel just in the other session. The whole project was about regeneration of industrial sites in cities, and our work package looked surprisingly at transport and mobility. So we didn't just look at walking, we also looked at cycling, but I'll focus on the walking part here. And what we wanted to do, these were ongoing regenerations. They're still ongoing. Not surprisingly, it takes time. We go a little bit into the cases shortly. But our goal was to get a feel of what can be achieved through these regenerations. So we had these cases that we could look at that were ongoing. So that's meant we were studying more the legal planning plans and some of what's been done already, rather than doing a post and like a pre and post assessment. And also, to be clear, this is all relatively qualitative work. We did not do any modeling. We didn't do any studies in that way. We went in to look at the plans, and we used an assessment method that I'm going to get to very soon. All right. So these are cases from Norway, and I don't expect all of you to be familiar with it, but you might know where Oslo is. And so these are two smaller cities, well, actually mid-sized for a Norway size, not so far away from Oslo. What's interesting is that these are two cases that happen to be quite similar. They're both relatively similar in size, the cities, and then these were both former paper factories, actually, that were quite close to the city center, as you'll see on the next map. And they closed at a relatively similar time. The one in Skien closed in 2005, and the planning process started again shortly after, and it's going to be completed in 2025. The one in Moss, the factory closed in 2012, but already prior to that, already in 2006, I think they knew that it was going to go slowly towards the end. And that's going to be completed in 2038. A main difference, though, is, as you can see on the map, Moss is quite close to Oslo. Here you have a railway going very rapidly between the two. So there's a lot of commuting going in towards the Oslo area, whereas in Skien, the commuting is mainly there in the neighboring city. Now, a key element here is that both sides are very close to the city center, relatively walkable distance. But the one in Skien is an island, and whereas the one in Moss is an area outside of it. There is a bridge going on, but as you can see, it's still at closer proximity than the cluster area ones. And of course, these are retransformations. So these are existing areas that we're going into, and then they're going to transform from industrial to mixed use. So again, our question was, what could be achieved through these regenerations? Can it be a catalyst for getting more sustainable mobility
for the city as a whole. And here I'm going to, as I said, focus on the walking. Just very quickly, the theoretical underpinnings, and I hope I'm relatively preaching to the choir here on a lot of these things. The starting point is, of course, that Norway, as most city countries, has societal goals for a modal shift. An important thing in Norway is that we have something called the zero growth objective. It states that in all the larger city regions, all growth in personal traffic should be taken up by public transport, walking, and cycling. Now, these are for the larger city areas, but what we've seen since 2012 when this goal was introduced is that also smaller cities and down to villages of 5,000 are now adopting it because it's a relatively easy goal to adapt to. Doesn't mean we're planning that way, still a way to go, but in any case, we're doing that. And one of the ways to achieve it is, of course, through central densification because of the strong link between land use and transport development. In our research, we often talk about the competitiveness between modes. If it becomes more attractive to use one mode than the other, then it's more likely to have a shift. And of course, driving tends to be relatively attractive for many reasons. So an important thing going into this research was that we were wondering, will the plans contribute to a stronger competitiveness of walking and cycling compared to driving? And we saw that the central urban regeneration of these cases presented might be an opportunity for the cities to just promote and facilitate a modal shift. To do this, as I said, we undertook a qualitative approach to this. I'm not going to go into the methods now, but we developed, based on what other people had done before us naturally, we have taken an assessment of the walkability, the bikeability, but also the drivability of these places. It's very simply, we have these different categories of how the built environment influences walking and cycling. And so looking at different physical structures and capacities and characteristics of the plants, we try to assess what could be expected from how the development is supposed to go forward. So we did document studies of the legal planning documents, field work, and we also did interviews with the actors involved in the planning. I'm sorry for the middle of the class, but I'm going to try to go through different things. So this is what we were asking about. And this is a very brief summary of our main findings. So here we're listed both of them, and I'm going to focus on the walkable aspects of it. And so as you can see, overall, we find that both plans have a relatively high potential in many ways, but we can clearly see that one plan scores better. It's likely, and I'm saying likely because it's not built yet, it's being built, but it seems to be likely to be relatively just very walkable, very bikeable, and only somewhat drivable. Whereas the other one, that is the island that I said, is walkable, bikeable, but it's also very drivable. And there are some key reasons for this. Now, both have a very high potential, as they showed you, they're centrally located. And with the regeneration, they are creating new connections for pedestrians and cyclists to the sites. So this all starts to give a very good start. And whereas one, the island in Skien, is mostly car restricted, the site in Moss is actually going to be just as relatively highly car restricted, and especially through traffic. So you can drive in there, but you cannot only drive out, you cannot drive through it, which is, of course, really important. And we see also that there are separating walking and cycling from car traffic. But a key difference here is that in Moss, they put up enough space that they can also separate pedestrians and cyclists from each other, which, of course, will heighten the walkability of it. The internal network is also relatively curvable and high connectivity for Moss, a little bit less in Skien. Now, unfortunately, what we see from Skien when it tries to drag it down is, and this is a pre-existing condition, is that there is the main road goes across the island and it's elevated, which both means that you have a lot of car traffic going through it, and also because it's an elevated bridge structure, there's a difficulty of creating internal connectivity. And so they're trying to see how can we solve this issue in a good way or bad way. And it's not been solved as they hoped. So this creates a lack of permeability. And also here, they did not set enough sides. So as I said, there's not enough space to really separate pedestrians and cyclists. Whereas something that does drive down in Moss is that they have ample parking availability because there wasn't set any maximum scores, only minimum scores. So as you can see, there's something about the competitiveness between the modes here that shifts in a certain direction from what we can tell from the plans. Nevertheless, our take on the plans is that there is a good potential that could be even further capitalized on, especially at the Shan area, because since it's an island, it's limited, so we won't be able to scroll further out, and then you can maybe use those restrictions in a positive way. But the facilitation for car use is strong, so I think Eric has a very good point when he says that maybe a good pedestrian plan, you need to start with the driving. Just very briefly, I said we also talked to the planners, because one thing is looking at the plans, and then our questions also, but why did we end up there? So we did interviews with the involved planners to try to understand why the plans ended up the way they did, also as a way to get somewhat the takeaways for future regenerations, what can be learned from this. Now, both parties had very high intentions, but a main difference here is that at Moss, they had a very ambitious municipality, and they had already done a lot of work on cycling as well, which already, I think, gave them the courage to aim high, setting enough a lot of space and really thinking, how can this become the best cycling and the best pedestrian solutions? At Costa, we find that the mindset was a little bit different. At the time, there were low national scores for walking and cycling, which still is, to be honest. But also the economy is slightly different, and it seems to have influenced what they thought they could achieve. So they didn't aim as high, and they said, okay, well, this is what we have to work with. It'll be what it is. The lack of being able to imagine going higher up. And so also you see there are some technical, as I talked to the restraints, that also limit stuff. And then together, this means that it was more planned as for the status quo, rather than saying, how can we get higher shares if we really aim high? And for them, they were also a bit surprised when all the pieces came together and said, well, actually, this became more car-based than we thought it would be. Whereas from Vector, they're saying it seems that we were a little bit ahead of our time, because if you look at it today, it's actually not that ambitious when it comes to it, but going back at the time, it was ambitious. So there's something about being ahead of the time. I'm going to skip through this because I don't have time, and I wanted to just take the last 2 minutes to talk a little bit about what are some of our thoughts on this. Now, of course, we're looking at legal plans, and these are just some thoughts from researchers who have done a case study. But some notions from us is that, of course, the mindset of the planners going into this clearly and not surprisingly has an influence on it. And we think it has something to do with, we all have these ambitious goals in national and regional and municipal plans. And then the question is, when it comes to a neighborhood scale project, how do we operationalize those objectives into the plans? How do we say, well, if this is where I want to get to, how do I need to design my physical structures to get there? As for example, the first thing we saw from Sarah, they're saying, well, now we want to, this is where we want to get to, what are the structures we have to put in place, which I think is good. And also something about thinking big. So there needs to be a change in mindsets that we constantly hear about. And one of the changes we think needs to be towards getting on board and being ambitious from the get-go. But there's also importance to assess the potential at the beginning. We're not entirely sure, but it seems that this wasn't necessarily done to the vast extent when it comes to cycling and walking. The typical feasibility studies were done, as we do in all planning situations, but not necessarily with a complete focus on walking and cycling and asking, what can we manage or what can we achieve? And maybe that would have opened up some more thoughts of what could be done. And especially if we had that, maybe another thing that we saw that wasn't done, and it's not required in Norway, once the planning propositions were in place, they were assessed from the environmental perspective and transport needs to be done, but not with regards to what will be the consequences for pedestrians and cyclists here. So there's something about the system that maybe needs to be put more in place if you really want to say, what's the impact for pedestrians if we plan the transformations the way these classes are needed. So assess the potential and also enable to establish frames for the plan outcome and where we want to get to. And so then what are some of the key elements that the plan needs to take into place and make sure that it sticks with us if we want to achieve the goals that we have set as a society, but also for these particular projects. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for the attention. I apologize if I spoke a little bit too fast, but this is a passionate topic.
Great, thanks very much, Maya. Okay, so moving on to our last presentation, and that will be Paolo Cambra.
Yeah.
In Lisbon. Hi, Paolo. So Paolo's an urban planner and started researching walkability 10 years ago at the University of Lisbon. His thesis is about exploring the effects of urban interventions in changing walking behaviour. And he also specialises in bringing technology and data into active travel and mobility research, which I think is what he's going to be speaking about today. It's been throughout the years he's shared his findings with Walk21 on measuring walkability, pedestrian flow analysis, and digitizing digitalization of pedestrian networks. So look forward to your presentation, Paolo. We're ready when you are.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm just going to share this. Okay, so hello all. It's great to be here again at Walk21. Hope you're having a great time. Very sad to not being there in person. And I just realized I'm the last presenter of the last session of the day. So I'm the last man standing between you and the pub. So there's no pressure here. Try to stick to the time. First, who knows this game? I imagine nobody. Okay, I don't hear anybody. So I mean, I think I'm the oldest.
I love that game.
Yeah. I thought I was the oldest geek in the room, and perhaps I am. No, but SimCity was really about making cities, and believe it or not, I played it so much, and I loved it so much that I eventually became an urban planner. And one of the features SimCity had was the bulldozer. It's kind of an undo button, very cheap, very fun to use. So if you're not happy with the way your city was developing or evolving, you could just bulldoze it and build it again, just like in real life, right? That would be really handy to have that tool in hand. But now we're not playing again. So in our cities, it would be a very good option to stop making the same mistakes over and over. Simply put, stop building cities like this. This is here in Lisbon metropolitan area, somewhere just in the outskirts. Which brings us to the topic of this presentation, putting walkability into planning. So how did this happen? One fine day, I was just wondering, after doing this research, how could all these walkability metrics could inform urban planning? How to make them standard or a regulatory parameter? Something that the municipalities could use to say, nah, this development is not pedestrian friendly, it cannot be approved, sorry. You know, just like you have for parking provision or roofing materials, sometimes even wall color. They say, no, you cannot build it. So luckily for us, a team at the municipality of Lisbon was wondering pretty much the same things. And we shared the same main concern. How could we ensure that we are developing pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods for the future? So they came to us, to our Walkability and Active Mobility Research Group, that's UShift at Technical University of Lisbon, and they brought us a project and a very simple question. They said, we want to build this affordable housing project. Is this new proposed development going to improve local walkability? And it was not really a small project. It's about 250 dwellings with an influence area of 36 hectares. And this is to give you an idea of the area right now. So it's pretty much vacant land, an empty space between the existing fabric, and social housing, and some heavy road infrastructure that was left there from previous plans. And this is what they proposed. So they put the new buildings, they improve all the pedestrian paths, parks, greenery. This is what they have now, and this is what they propose. So to the second question, is the new proposed development going to improve local walkability? That's a tough one, eh? Well, it depends, but when you look at the inside of the project from the inside of these boundaries, yes, it's going to improve local walkability. But the catch here was not to focus just on the project itself, but on the integration with the existing fabric. So the project concept was to build this integrated pedestrian-friendly city, like a new centrality, much like the 15 minutes concept that really could integrate the existing buildings and neighborhoods. So from one question, we now had two questions to address. One about the new development and one about integration and articulation. So our approach was to evaluate the before and after walkability of the project, and then the before and after accessibility of the whole influence, the whole area of influence, before and after the project. With the third part about providing recommendations for walkability improvement for the architectural project. So let's go quickly over the methods and the results. First, we digitized the pedestrian network, and this was about 50 kilometers of every element, not just sidewalks and crossings. And crossings are very, very important on a pedestrian network. It's important to digitize the location and the configuration of the crossings. And that's why street center lines won't do the trick. We really have to do a different way. Then we did street audits to evaluate the walkability. We did this using this EAP framework that we developed a few years ago also at the University of Lisbon, and which covers 4 main pedestrian groups. That's adults, seniors, children, and impaired mobility. So you have these 4 perspectives on how walkability is and how it would change according to the project settings. So then we got to the before and after walkability per street segment. What then? Challenge. How to make a meaningful comparison between the before and after. Would you just take all of these scores and find an aggregate walkability value, like the whole area average? No, that didn't seem to work well. So instead, we assessed the distribution of the pedestrian level of services. That is to say, you have 5 classes, walkability classes, from A to E, and A is the top level, like walkability over 80s in this score, going down to the level E, that's lower than 20. So we were interested in finding out how many streets were at the top level, class A pedestrian-friendly streets, and how many were in the very shabby level E, very nasty, and as to the pedestrian, inaccessible. And let's face it, we don't want really all the streets to be these top streets, class A high streets. We need some natural variety. The urban fabric comprises different streets that serve different purposes. And we do not know much of what's our guidance here, what should we aim for. But for sure, we did not want any E level. That's a really low walkability score, and usually associated to inaccessible streets. So we set the standards. We set the standard for the distribution based on previous analysis of street walkability, at the street level in other neighborhoods in Lisbon. So that's really a tiny percentage of class A, vast majority of class B and class C, and only a little percentage of class D and no class E. And we try to see how the before and after comparison of this composition of the network worked. Now for the second question, pedestrian accessibility, we did a comprehensive analysis of walking path directness between origin and destination pairs. So this was made to the whole area of influence, up to 15 minutes walking distance from a new development. This led to 67 OD pairs and 455 paths that we evaluated. And because we were using that the digital pedestrian network, the detailed pedestrian network, any change, let's say you make a shortcut here or replace a new pedestrian crossing there, it can be captured to some extent. And because this project had this feature, this high line, this pedestrian bridge crossing over a main road and connecting 2 hills, it really made a difference. So in some cases, it saved up to 5 minutes walking. And this is a lot when you're considering a 15 or a 20-minute journey. To the final step, to recommendations. So we went through all the projects and provided some recommendations. I mean, these are things that come in the literature, in the urban design literature, in the walkability literature. But we combine what made sense to that project, to what what they had and what could be accomplished easily. And eventually that came up to good results. So they realized that could raise the walkability scores even further, like for the case of children, up to 70% more, just with few changes. And I can tell you one of the few simple solutions that make a big difference was the implementation of these coexistence zones, of zones 30. Just keeping some streets to traffic. The other ones are not close to traffic, but they are really limited. And that added up to the walkability and livability of the places. So all in all, having done all the calculations and having all the figures, we could say with some confidence that yes, the new proposed development was going to improve local walkability, and yes, the proposed development was going to improve the urban integration articulation. And could we make it even more walkable? For sure. So this affordable housing project got our first seal of approval. It passed. But more importantly, it showed that this could be possible. It could be possible to incorporate walkability standards into the development and appreciation of these urban developments. And I don't think it would be so difficult to make it a standard approval procedure at any municipality. I mean, here in Lisbon, Portugal, by law, any development larger than 100 dwellings or so has to make a traffic impact study. This same project had to do a traffic impact study. So why not do a walkability impact study? Perhaps the national walking strategies that we were discussed here at Walk21 yesterday, they can help in setting such standards for this municipal development approval and motivating regulatory change. For the time being, this was voluntary, and we really have to give credit to the team from the rehabilitation unit of Lisbon municipality for taking this step forward, for wanting to make this happen. They couldn't be here today, but I'll leave their contacts here in the slides in case you want to know more about the project and motivations. And I don't want to take up so much time, so I'll go quickly around the project slides. You can always check them later, the proposals. Just to say that they were happy with the results. They were happy to learn that it could improve the walkability later on with following projects. Some eye candy for you following the previous presentations. This was quite a nice project. Really wouldn't mind living here. Yeah, see that's the high pass that goes through the bridge, the high line. Really good ambience. And that's it. The key message here is that ex ante walkability analysis should surely be promoted, as we saw also with the previous presentations here in the session. And by the way, they came back to us with another project, a similar affordable housing operation, but this time 3 times larger. It's 3,000 dwellings, 58 hectares. And hopefully we'll be able to share the results with you in the next Walk21 conference. For now, thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy it. Yes.
I'll kick off the Q&A. Did you ever get a megalopolis in SimCity?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I just asked, did you ever get a megalopolis in SimCity?
Make a one.
Megalopolis. That was the highest achievement in the English language version of the game anyway when I was playing.
Oh, sorry.
Right, moving swiftly on. Do the other presenters want to come up and we'll do a Q&A up here? Yeah. Thanks. I'll just open it to the floor around 20 minutes or so. So if anyone has any questions, fire away. Yeah, just put your hand up. Cynthia, you can go first. And I've got you as well if I have time for my question. Seeing how the first one went, I might spot it.
This question is for Mark and Eric, and for your project with, you're talking about removing car parking spaces and removing space for cars by 50%. do you get a lot of backlash then from the public when that happens, or is people generally supportive of those measures? Because I know if something were to happen here in Dublin, if we were to do something like that, it would just it would be stuck in the planning process for many years. So just how does that work in the Netherlands in terms of taking away space from cars?
Well, that always works difficult, but the positive aspect in this case is that nobody is living in the area, only 200 people, so there's not so much opposition against that. And the main goals were in a plan which was consulted in the city and was adopted by the city council. So we have that process already done, and we're building 9,000 houses in the total area, and there's a lack of housing. So everybody is positive about building speed,
Yeah.
and everybody is positive about diminishing all those car lanes in that area, because that's a pain in the ass for the whole city.
Yeah.
It's really bad entrance to the city.
Yeah.
At this time, so if you can prove it, and it will be wrong, the other is a couple of years going to be, but I think the area is going to be much more livable, and that's really important to show to. Yeah, people who live there, but that's a small amount, but it can be a great entrance for Brainboard. But now it's just a couple of, really, awful buildings.
And are you incorporating schools in that development as well? Like if there's 8,000 new houses or dwellings going in, will there be schools as well to support the
So it will be functional. There have been doctors, medical, social, community building schools, at least a few. And now we're going to plan out this program, and it's for walking. It's very strategic where to plan these, because these are the places where we walk to, and who can feed the walking network. So where will the school be, or where will the community building be? So these spots can become the real places which create a neighborhood. And this planning process for the ground floors is very important.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on that. The way you plan, has there been are you going far beyond the minimum requirements? Did you say 0.3? I think is that minimum requirements for developments in the area, or have you chosen to go lower than that? And if so, how is that achieved?
We have changed the parking standards a few years ago
In Eindhoven.
in Eindhoven, and I think from Rotterdam also here. I think we're now about equal in these station areas with the other big cities in Holland. But if people object, so now with the first projects, we are up in objection procedures at the highest public judges in the Netherlands to defend these low standards. And they asked us for, do you have any experience? Does the shared mobility system really works? It's innovation. So we're in a process of changing the law, and the judges have to get used to it. That's my opinion now, and it will cost a few years to get this all accommodated, I guess.
And I know a lot of people don't live there at the moment, but presumably there's already buildings there. I mean, has the local authority or the local government been able to purchase those buildings, or what's the land ownership situation for the area that you're going to generate?
Yeah, it's a very complex process. So the landowner situation is also complex. So we did another area about 30 hectares. That was an old Philips company land, and we bought it. So there was 1 hour. Here we have, I think, 43 or 44 owners. And those are investors or owners from historic owners. So we started off with a process of getting a straight view and a supported view on the ambitions for the area. And all those owners were included in the process. And afterwards, on the basis of those results, we made the master plan and brought that up with the support to the city council. And so now in the next phase, the master plan is ready, and per building cluster, we are talking with the owners on, I've not explained it all, but on standards, on quality, on quality of mobility, on sustainability for these building plots. Well, to make a plan, and they can bring in suggestions or designs for the plan. We have to cope with these requirements and the policies.
In your example, Smiley, were the factories still owned by the old owners, or was that land bought by local
split? So it was split. So what happened is, so if you remember the map, there was one that was closer to Norway, to Oslo, another one. So the one that was not an island, let's call it the island and the non-island. The non-island, what happened is that a developer bought the factory land while the factory was slowly going towards the end of its life. So they already started there. And it's true, this is a big difference. I didn't really talk about it. But for that part, you have one developer who's owning the whole thing and does the whole place. Whereas for the other one, the factory owner started the feasibility studies, and then along the path, it was split up and sold to other developers. And you do actually see a clear difference. It's interesting. It's not a really big space, but nevertheless, you have multiple developers, and you can see a difference in how they've approached it. But it's not just, I think, the difference in ownership. I think it also has something to do with the time. Like first housings that were built there are these like really standard apartment buildings that could be from anywhere in the world, right? And they all have underground parking. And the newer ones, you already see it as a little bit different take. So yeah, ownership does.
Yeah, good stuff, because that's one of my worst. I think it's one of the worst things about Dublin at the moment. It's the level of dereliction in the city centre, especially, and a lot of that is because of the ownership situations. It's actually more profitable for owners to not develop the land, which is a strange situation. Anyway, I'll start ranting. Any other questions? Over.
Yeah, regarding the US permeability work, do you have like a project where you can see the actual permeability project that you did? Did you count the pedestrians using like post occupancy? Counting how many people use these shortcuts?
Yeah, and so the kind of analysis that would have been done would have been, counting households or whatever. So you'd have a sense of how many people are living in whatever house in the States, and then your catchment, your 5-minute walking, etc. And then we've done it before and after analysis of if you make this intervention, how will that impact on you? You'd hope that you're getting more people to that 5-minute catchment, etc. So there was that kind of analysis done. But like I said, then on the same thing is more recently, it's more on the ground observational as well. So it's not just numbers, it's gender, kids, walkers, cyclists, etc. So it's a combination of two. So that's it. And as to you'd like to see the actual accessibility review documents.
Yeah, where I'm coming from, we're building grounds now. They really need permeability.
Yeah, and I think it's great to kind of start thinking about it at the earlier stages.
I have a question for Paolo. Thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting. And I like the way you talk about making walkability part of analyzing plans, part of seated approval. It reminds me kind of the way we're shifting forward with climate adaptation, and we're making that part of our standards for building as well. My question is about the walkability analysis that you showed. I think you called it IAPC, something if I read it correctly. It looked quite practical, and there's a lot of tools to evaluate walkability, but this one didn't seem like it would take maybe thousands of hours to fill in. So my question would be how long around does it take you to do this analysis, and is it available online or open source?
Well, thank you for your question. I think I got most of it. So it's about how do you do the walkability? How do you evaluate? How do you measure it? Okay, but before enough to use this IAP method. It's something that's available online. We published it. I can put on the chat the reference, and it's meant to be a really straightforward method, so that you go out to the street and you have the checklists. So it's a compensatory method. You have quite a few. You have 7 dimensions that you have to evaluate, and then you just do your best judgment, and then it's a weighted sum of those parameters that are calibrated for each pedestrian group. So we've tested it, and it's quite robust. For this practical, for this project, for these 20 kilometers of pedestrian network of sidewalks, it took about a week to accomplish. And it was more complicated was to assess the future of it, because you don't really know what's going to happen. So you have to set some standards, like how it's going to be the architecture, the ground floor uses, what kind of shops are there going to be. That we don't know at this stage, at the development stage. So we set a fair, like a minimum or a medium setting for those parameters.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philip.
Can also make a...
Sorry, go on.
No, I wanted to make also a question, but I can wait for after.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because there's just a few more questions here.
It's not anyone in particular. I wonder if if it's come up, I guess you talked about future developments, but when it comes to like ways that things get developed already, is there a way of figuring out where people want to walk the big towns? Like if there isn't really through neighbourhoods, like maybe if there's a destination you want to go to, but I don't know if anyone has any like pictures on that or something like knowing if people have a long way to walk around, or if there's a easy cut through, like how do you know if they want to run? I don't know.
Desire lines.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that one that we use a tool that shows walking journey times as the crow flies, and obviously then you would have the journey time, because there's a wall or whatever, has a lot of viruses aids where it's designed. So you can see the difference between what it could be and what it currently is. And a lot of the advocates, there's obviously in this field that we all work in, there's a lot of advocates who do things like that for their local area, which are really useful for us as well. But the amazing thing is that I think in the work that the NTA does, permeability measures, even though they're probably the smallest thing we do in terms of infrastructure, they're one of the most difficult things to get through residents, because even though you're showing where sometimes the differences can be huge, it turns a 25-minute walk into a 5-minute walk, but people just don't want them in their housing estates. And I don't know if that's the Irish condition, if it happens in other places as well, but it's very difficult to get through local resident groups. And I was actually wondering for your one in Kingswood and elsewhere, like you obviously got the Kingswood one in, but did you fail to get others in because of those issues?
Yeah, so there were just two things. One is sometimes how you know is you can see kind of paths lined out and shopping trolleys, when people are climbing over a roof, observe people lifting their kids over railings and all that kind of thing. So sometimes on site you can see that. But yeah, there were quite a few, and the ones which are, you would have had in, say, Amberley and out by Cookstown, you would have had, like I said, people living closest to it with the most resistant, whereas people living at the far end of the estate didn't mind, they could get the benefit without the kind of hassle of, or they'd be open. But I think the biggest concern people have is just they have this fear of people, having multiple escapes if they were robbing the house and all that kind of thing. And if your kids can play out currently, and you have a toddler and suddenly you have a gaping hole and they run through, so I think they're probably legitimate concerns, and then it's how you try and do it. Lewis certainly, like LB, for a large extent of it, would have had people very resistant prior to it being built, and then once it was, they kind of wanted to get like on the Green Line out to Brightstown. There were a whole lot of openings, and that people wanted to just get into town and use it so they could see. So yeah, sometimes it took about 5 times to knock on people's doors.
And this was the theme of what we're talking about today is building new areas. So we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen in the new parts of our cities that we built, but the issue is retrofitting all parts.
Yeah, it was just on the same kind of subject. Sorry, this will be more retrofitting as well. But I'm just thinking of one particular example where there's a very clear option for mobility, but their residents group are very much worried about antisocial behaviour. And if you actually walk along that route, it's littered with bottles and cans. So the antisocial behaviour they're worried about would likely be lessened by the permeability route. Is there any research you're aware of or any means of convincing residents groups that actually, in a way their opposition is making the issue worse or preventing it from being reduced? Sorry, just that was to yourself with the permeability.
I mean, I suppose it's kind of trying to find before and after good examples maybe or a good way to kind of convince people. So sometimes you can have alleyways with the dead end and they're closed off precisely because people don't want to filtered and the dead ends become so again, I suppose finding good examples and the importance then of making it attractive, well used, and that makes it safer.
I'm not familiar with any research. I think one of the things we try to do in the NTA with our projects, and we're doing it more and more now, is have before and after, like good visuals around that, but also have testimonials from people who work or live near schemes. Especially if you can get someone who can talk to camera.
An anti who turned into a pro.
Exactly, yeah. And we have a few videos on those that are going to be coming onto our website soon. And we use them as a tool to then go to other local authorities who we fund and say, okay, well, look what these people here are saying. We think the same thing can happen here. But I'm not familiar with any research. It would be good to talk.
Even like research, but building up.
But we need to research though, that's the thing, because this is tapping into shortcuts, but it's a little bit creating shortcuts. And I tried to look a little bit into research on shortcuts for that reason and with the ambition of saying, like, has there been documentation of what has been done, how it's been achieved? And I think it's like you're saying, it's easy to sort of see, and then we had a workshop on it and someone coined like shortcuts makes life easier. And you're like, well, it seems easy, but like you're saying, there are all these concerns that come up. But I think what it taps into, what you're saying it's the element of participation around it and building acceptance and sort of shifting that. So then you would have to have those kind of tools, I guess, to get into it. But then also the importance of documenting what's being done and then making that not just locally, but also nationally and internationally shared, because sharing those experiences and then making sure to not just use pictures of what was done, but also the story behind it. How did you manage to make that done? Like, for example, the project you're having too, so saying, okay, how did we manage to get people on board so that maybe we can build those tools for that.
It's interesting actually because I know that you are from a research institute. I think Emily might be as well. I don't know if maybe I'm wrong, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we have that. Yeah, obviously we have academics in universities, but we don't, as far as I'm aware, have a transport institute that would be feeding delivery agencies with this kind of information, which would be good to have. And yeah, if either you two want to get in touch with me just through the conference contact details, I can send you on so that's what I mentioned. Any other questions? Yeah.
So thank you all for your talks. They were very informative. Mine's more of an open question once again to everyone. I wanted to ask if any of you have thought about how these mobility and things can affect maybe those in wheelchairs or maybe even those who are maybe on the spectrum like autism and maybe the family that can't exactly let their child walk around because really they might need to quickly run back into the car and so on. So I just wanted to see if you guys have thought about that as much, or is that more of an issue which should be done separate from the sort of normal people?
I can say right away, no, it should not be dealt with separately. On the contrary, it should be part of it. And so, first of all, I think it's important to talk about, space is limited, even if you're having, even though this is the last project we saw in Lisbon, and it said it's been huge, but in the end, when you want to put everything into that, there's not that much space left. So then it's the question of how do we use the space, and who do we use it for? And one thing you often come up when you talk about with decision makers, and they're like, oh, but yeah, the people in the wheelchair and the people like this and everything, they're being held up as the reason for why we need to keep all these parking spaces. And my answer is at least twofold, not threefold. First of all, well, yes, of course, but that's why we need to have some parking spaces for them, but don't hold on up as an excuse for them keeping 50 parking spaces. And the second thing is, it's not enough that they have a parking space. We need to make sure that the rest of the way from that disabled parking space to the store or to the rest is also very accessible, and it often isn't. So I think it sort of goes hand in hand. And I personally firmly believe that if you make the environment more walkable, you also make it more equitable, and you make it more accessible. And so to go back to your last, like, should be dealt with separately, absolutely not. On the contrary, as planners and researchers also, we should always try to put ourselves in those shoes. So I try to, when I talk to decision makers or planners, I try to imagine, not everybody has a kid, not everybody has to go with a walker, but a lot of us has tried to pull a suitcase after us. And imagine how annoying it is to pull the suitcase and have to go up and down the stairs and everything. And that's a minor element of what it's like if you have more impairments. And so if you try to aim for creating something that's accessible, if you're pulling a suitcase, at least you're one step to it. And the second thing is I didn't go into the details in our assessment, but that was one of the elements why one project we say it has a lot of shortcomings for walkability was exactly also the difference in level, and there was only stairs. There weren't an elevator or anything without stairs to access to. And so then, in my opinion, you're just far from it. But it is a valid point. I just want us to meet the question of what about people who need a car in a different way, and also saying, and the rest needs.
So if you had say, a universal design course, so it's designing for everybody, and particularly kind of words, at least mobile, and then it will be usable by everybody almost. But then, we run a usable for people with disabilities, and the feedback is really interesting and important. And see there's kind of recurring issues, and one of them would be just kind of the e-mobility, so faster electric bikes and scooters and all that. That's a whole new thing to think about. And then just set down bus stops, that people some people just don't drive or can't drive or whatever. They're reliant on public transport, but they also need people to, somebody to talk to them or whatever. So absolutely, it needs to be all kind of thought of together. But at the same time, I think, as was said, there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit if you got rid of all the cars that most of us don't need, and you just provided for, the kind of vehicles that are the residual need, but you do really, really well, which most of the cars don't.
I don't know if you were here yesterday, but I wasn't there myself. There was a session that specifically focused on that yesterday, so you could check out maybe some of the recordings of that. I think some people from the NCBI, the National Council of the Blind, were presenting at that, and I just thought that Kaviki said it was great. So I'd look back at the program and maybe check that out as well.
Yeah, I can have of course, we go on the design for all this, so we follow all the guidelines and requirements. But we discuss all our designs and our plans, I think 6 times a year with representatives of all those groups to look do they see any misfits or miss some requirements. And what we basically do is, if something is realized, we have a post tests with them. So we walk along and see if we have to do adjustments to make it better.
So you mentioned that they have a manual accessibility, which all kind of solutions are presented and the designs are tested. Can get a full statement from the menu.
And then just also just thinking again, it goes into what Paula was showing a little bit. What we also try to point at is there needs to be assessment of when plans are being made, what they are assessed against, and I think one thing is the manuals, of course, but then you also need to look at the picture as a whole and see again, what's the effect going to be on the pedestrian and the cyclist, and that might also be able to take it into account if we got, as they were saying, if walking becomes a higher requirement in planning processes, that could be a way of better assuring that it's not just, okay, you have the guidelines, but if the guidelines are in a place that anyway it's not nice to walk. I don't think it helps.
Hi, yeah, I absolutely agree with what's just been said. I think the other thing that we've got to be careful of are unintended consequences, because you can have wonderful planning for wider pedestrian areas with cycle bits, and then you plonk a whole lot of cafe tables and everything else, and half what was originally there in the first place for pedestrians. So, and also lovely sculptures or bollards that become trip hazards and issues for other people. So I think it's really, the unintended consequences of all of this are really quite significant. I think with what we've heard, there was bits around community consultation. We have a tool called the Place Standard Tool, which has been picked up by the World Health Organization and is now being used in about 30 different countries, which is around community-based consultation. But it's looking at inequality. So I've got the website up in front of me to remind me. So it's place-based action to tackle inequalities, improve outcomes for communities and support positive action on environment. And it's about using a standardized methodology to talk to communities and get the message back as to what works or doesn't work in their areas. So, but the Place Standard Tool, it's on ourplace.scot. If you want to have a look.
Sounds good. Thanks very much. And unintended consequences, I mean, when you think about electric charging points for vehicles, when you think about dockless bikes, dockless scooters, there's a lot of things that are happening which are good, but they are going to be bad for people with mobility impairments if they're not done in the right way. So yeah, it's an interesting area. We're running over time a little bit, but if anyone has any final questions, we can do that.
I have one.
Yeah.
And behind you. No, this one is for Emily, actually, because you talked about in Switzerland, and it makes a real difference in the way we consider planning and design. It's about parking. And before you had this regulatory, you needed to provide parking, right, in Switzerland. But then you had a regulatory change, and then all of a sudden there was no need to provide parking. So how did that revolution happen? Was it like a referendum, like people saying we don't want this anymore? Was it top down, the federal government saying this is over? How did you manage to do it? We weren't the same.
You're on mute there, Emily. You're on mute.
You're muted. To press the mic icon.
Can you unmute it, Shane? No.
Oh no.
It's on there, right?
Down there.
I guess in the meantime, I wanted to, because I was thinking about it, but Helen, and I wanted to shoot in the importance of politicians and decision makers in this case as well, and then the role of advocacy, because I know in Oslo now, we're talking about driving, they are going to put into place a new parking strategy. And I know one of the things they're trying to get into that is to open for the possibility of making new apartment dwellings without parking. Yeah. So, that would be the thing.
Sorry, we can hear you now, Emily.
Yes.
Maybe you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, fine. Sorry. It was not federal law. It was some cantons who said, stop. We don't want any more cars. There's too much cars. There's too much traffic, and we have to stop it. So there's no obligation to build parking spaces, but in other cantons, it's not that much. You have to build, and so it's really different. It depends on the region. So we try to make for everywhere, so we don't have to build, but it depends on the politics who are elected. And for example, it's really interesting in Basel. you don't have to build any parking places. So that's a really great example for us, and you can choose whatever you want, but it's not for all the Switzerland. And on the map, you saw that there are cantons where there is no projects. It's just because the law doesn't allow that. So we still have work, but in some places it's really great.
Cool, thanks, Emily. I think that's probably it. Thanks very much to all the speakers. That was really, really interesting. And thanks to everyone for listening and for